I have this thesis in life that's probably adverse to the way a lot of people think about it, is that niceness and kindness are not the same thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Being honest is kind, right? And sure, there's a whole gradient of like how you present that information, how you present your honesty. Some people believe in the concept of radical candor, where like anything that hits your head, you're honor bound to tell somebody, which I don't agree with. But when you are asked for your opinion, or when you have an opportunity to give your opinion, I do believe you're honor bound to be honest about it. And I view that to be kind, even if it doesn't always come off as nice.
The co-founder and current CEO of ODF, Julian, reached out to me and told me that he loved the forum episodes. ODF helps people explore starting companies and find the missing pieces for starting companies. For example, they help you in figuring out what to build, who to build it with. ODF helps you in going from idea to conviction on what it is that you want to build. All of this within a week. ODF has helped over 1,000 startups launch over the last 5 years and helped them raise over $2 billion. To check out ODF, go to beyonddeck.com. That is BEONDECK.com. Thank you. Enjoy. Hey guys, how are you doing well?
Yeah, we're good. We're just over here in Nashville, Tennessee, starting off our Monday.
We'll go alphabetically. So Hong, then James. Let's start with intros.
Yeah. I'm Hong. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founder of Ducky. I came from a technical background, so before Ducky, I was a machine learning engineer at Scale.ai. I worked a couple of different industries during my career. So I actually started off in supply chain optimization, later moving to kind of financial crime and fraud prevention. More recently, now we are building kind of like customer service AI, which is, again, a very different industry, but in many ways, I think technology has been the common thread across all the different roles in my career.
James.
I'm James. I've been doing startups for about 10 years now. I started my professional career after college actually singing in a band, which, by the way that we talk about startups, I guess many people wouldn't call it a startup, but it was definitely a startup. Moved down to Nashville, Tennessee to pursue music, and then ended up starting a men's shaving company focused on sustainable and ecological shaving called Shaveface. We did that for a couple of years. It ultimately failed. And then I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to move into fintech. So from there, two of us grew a company to about 140 people. That's where I guess not first, but that's where I continued my path in customer support. I did all the customer support for our shaving company, and then I did all the customer support for a few years at the fintech company as well. And then ended up moving into partnerships and business development, ultimately leading and running a crypto team there. So that really catapulted me into the world of crypto. I then did a stint in crypto asset management, which was a wild turn. And then after leaving that company, I was fortunate enough to be introduced to this man through a personal friend of ours. And we decided pretty early on that although we didn't have an idea when we first met, we definitely wanted to work together. So that's really what led us to starting Ducky.
The way that when I had Andrew and Steven on, we talked about this for them too. The way that it was for them was like Andrew started working on Taxware first. Then after a while, he got Stephen to help him out in building it. What difference does it make to add a co-founder to an already existing idea versus brainstorm one? That's for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna give this one to Hong, but I'll preface it by saying Hong brought me on, so to speak, but not necessarily onto an idea that existed. So a little bit, you'll get a little bit of a different answer than what you just asked, but hopefully it'll be interesting and helpful nonetheless.
Yeah, so I actually started off building computer vision technology follow an entirely different self-industry. So when James kind of first came on board, I was like working on motion capture, using webcams, using different type of just like commodity cameras. I think there's probably a couple of things that's kind of quite important when it comes down to bringing on a co-founder, especially at an early stage. The first thing is just the convictions that you would have around the ideas itself. But particularly, there's a necessary sense of ownership you would need from all the co-founders to buy in, because after all, you're asking them to commit a huge amount of their waking hours to this particular idea. The failure mode there is perhaps is where you have that asymmetric conviction, right? So one of you is super excited, the other one doesn't care about it. That's obviously not a great place to be. So I think it's about getting that conviction from everyone around the table to kind of to consistently pursue the idea. I do think it's okay if you have different perspective and different ways as to how you could contribute to that idea. But I think essentially, what you really want is alignment. You want to spend as little time as you can arguing and discussing and debating with the co-founder. Because I think the better aligned you are, the better you're able to kind of push and pull towards the same direction, rather than, two of you or many of you just consistently discussing this idea and discussing in different ways. I think that's definitely kind of like one of the key attributes regarding kind of like whether if it's two co-founders on the same idea or whether if one co-founder already have idea and bring someone else to the table. I think luckily for us, we kind of quickly realized that our first idea, we didn't have great founder market fit. So even though we had some technology for it, we didn't knew exactly how to sell into that industry. And particularly just there's so much learning curve. So for us, it was pretty easy for us to kind of pivot and commit into a different idea. And of course, once you go into a different industry, you have that symmetry, right? Both of you are in the same user meetings, both of you build conviction differently, but more importantly, you have a communication channel where you can bounce ideas between each other. So once that asymmetricness is gone, the development of the idea and the fact that both of you are on the same page definitely helps a lot.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing, which is that the aforementioned alignment, which is almost like a philosophical thing. It's not necessarily alignment on a specific idea, but it's more alignment on the things that matter to you, the ways you want to work, the individual skill sets that you bring to the table, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. I would say that matters like 98% of the total 100. And the reason for that is that whether or not you join somebody working on a specific idea, the likelihood as an early startup that you are going to change that idea radically, if not entirely, is incredibly high. So for us, I mean, I'll give Hong some credit. When I first met Hong and we decided to work together, I told him very bluntly that I wasn't sold on the idea that he was working with. And he was like, okay, no big deal. I'm sold on working with you. Like, let's go validate it. And if this isn't the idea that we want to do, let's do something different. So we really got to kind of deal with that very early on, like even before we'd sign papers or anything of that nature. So I'm really grateful for like the foundation that we have that's more like a personal relationship as opposed to like, hey, this is, rocketry, and we both really love rocketry, but we hate each other.
No.
Right. Like I think building like basing it off of a great relationship is a far more sustainable way to build a company than like just two people who really love this one idea, because odds are it's going to change.
How does that really correlate with building conviction in the person that you want to work with versus building conviction on the idea that got?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And kind of to echo something Jem said earlier, I think like it's not really about the idea, it's about the person, right? Because I think idea are ultimately worthless. Yin's personal relationship is obviously has so much layer to it. I think trust is definitely a big one. Trust is a instrumental unlock, because once you you trust someone, you give them all the autonomy, all the responsibility. I think for me, effectively unlocks me from a huge amount of decision making. That opens up my time, my mind share to work on the technology and the product side of things. The other aspects of this I kind of want to mention, just like synergy in skills. I think part of the reason we don't have we don't feel burdened by our discussion when it comes on to what areas of responsibility we should each own is because the fact that we actually don't have a huge amount of overlap in terms of skill set. So I mostly focus on technology and product, and James has this huge wide range of skill set to focus on all the other parts of the business, whether if it's sales, whether if it's operation, whether if it's logistics, finance, legal, which then mean that we have this really great like synergy when it comes on to what our responsibilities are. I think that definitely is undervalued comparatively when we look at some of the other founding teams, where typically you find the team, it's not unfrequent to see a team of like 2 engineers, 3 engineers, and then some of those engineers then have to go on to move into sales roles. Some of the engineers don't want to take on managerial roles and et cetera, et cetera. So I think for us, like that was a challenge that we never had to face.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it too has to do with like the power dynamic that gets constructed. And that's something that I don't think you can really teach or work on, right? Like there are some people who really want to start a company and they want every decision to be their final say, right? Even if it's not an area that they have expertise in. And personally, that's not a relationship that I have any interest in being part of. And I know Hong feels the same way. And it's not just like either a lack or a presence of egoism. I think a lot of it is kind of similar to what you said earlier, which is like there's not enough time in the day to do all the things that we need to do individually anyway. And odds are most of the time when you're making a decision, like there's somebody else in the world who's better equipped to making that decision than you are, but we're what we've got, right? So if you then kind of put another layer of like management on top of it, and you're like, hey, I want to do this. You don't know anything about what the thing is that I want to do, but you feel like you need to have the approval. It just becomes like really, really heavy with process. And I think like also just very emotionally heavy, where there's just like a really weird power dynamic. And it's, I don't know, true partnership is hard to find. But Hong likes to say that like he was, you know, it's all well and good for somebody to tell you about themselves, but the best way to really get to understand somebody is to see them in a room with their friends and their family and see how they treat people and see how those people talk about them. And Hong had a few opportunities to be in giant rooms full of my friends and family down here in Nashville over the first couple of months. And yeah, I don't know how that went for you, but obviously we're sitting here, so it couldn't have been too bad.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly think that you pass with flying colors, right? Because I think a lot of the time, you know, as you go through entrepreneurial journeys, you will meet many people. Not all of those people have great intentions. Typically, you want to index on what people do rather than what people say. And one of the higher signal I find is look at how they treat their friends and how their friends treat them rather than how they treat you specifically. And I think for me, as I got to know James's family, his friends, it was become immediately clear that like there's no way James is pretending to be a good person because all of his family, all of his friends treats him as if he's a great human being. That obviously buys me a huge amount of trust when it comes on to my relationship with James, whether if it's personal or whether it's transactional. I think ultimately it's just a incremental trust exercise, right? I think there is a iterative process when it comes on to eliminating all the risks interlinked and intertwined by leap of faith. I don't fly to every city all the time because I think everyone would be a great fit, right? I think by the time I decided that I'll go to Nashville, I've already had a huge amount of internal conviction to say like, oh, hey, like I know he has great work ethic. I know he wants very similar things when it comes on to life value, when it comes on to values, when it comes on to how to organize a company. So I've already, from a purely transactional perspective, already eliminated some of the risk that's associated with it. But at the same time, I think as individuals, and especially as you develop and nurture co-founder relationships, you have to make a leap of faith. You have to put yourself in a position, whether it's vulnerability, whether if it's a temporary fiscal downside, to put yourself into a position where you can then better develop and better nurture that relationship. Where I think for us, although we got on really great within the first 6 weeks while we were doing remote, while we were exchanging lots of different Notion documents, texts, calls, I think that our relationship kind of hit a new gear and accelerated a lot more once I flew to Nashville.
Once you met my mom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, once you met your dog.
Yeah, once you met my dog.
You never want to, meet someone from the first call and then go, I'll fly to your country. But you never want to be like, hey, I'm never going to fly to Nashville, right? So it's really up to the individual as to like, hey, where's your comfort level is, how much certainty you have within that relationship. But at the same time, going back to what Jem said earlier, like it's our transactional relationship. You might want to look at it very transactionally, but ultimately, like during the first call, we had good gut vibes, and I think that was instrumental in terms of just accelerating that relationship as much as we can.
Yeah, last thing I'll say is like, you're going to spend 8 to 10 years talking to somebody every single day, right? Like in a lot of instances, you're going to spend more time with them than you do with like your spouse. At least for both of us, it was very important that like we enjoyed spending time with one another. We enjoyed hanging out with one another. And we also knew that we could like have challenging conversations and come out the other side of those in a productive capacity. And all of those things get proven out pretty quickly early.
How did you guys figure out what drives the other? Like what drives James and what's right?
I mean, I feel like it's kind of another version of something that we've already said a little bit, which is we made sure to, ask one another a number of questions, to use existing templates on like co-founder dating, so to speak, which were very helpful, right? A number of them are super exhaustive. And that was step one, right? Step one was like answering those questions, deciding what questions to ask, answering those questions, and then being very honest with one another about, I think, like the foundational things that really mattered to us. Like just as an example, mine are very basic. Or like, I want to work with good people that I like and trust, and I want to work on interesting things. And like, yeah, sure, we'd love to build a successful company and make a ton of money. That'd be awesome. But like the first two things, knowing that the odds of the last thing happening are like not high in the land of startup, I want to make sure that I'm working with great people that I'm excited to wake up and work with every day. And I want to work on stuff that's actually interesting and it's going to like change me and grow me as a human being. But then to what Hong said earlier, right? Like it's very easy to get ChatGPT to write a bunch of answers that sound great when you're answering those questions, right? Like it's another thing to actually work with somebody every day and see those things in action. And, some of our early conversations around like, how much money to take, who do we take money from? Like they're hard, they're emotionally charged. And going through those experiences together were really when like the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and the things that you say you believe actually start to come up and bubble to the surface. And then you have to like put it aside for a little while and go like cook dinner and eat and like, have a nice night that's like actually soul fulfilling. And there's not a lot of people in the world that you can do all of those things within like a 12-hour span and actually enjoy all of them together. And that's really what did it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were very intentional about the partnership rather than the business itself.
Yeah.
Particularly, I think very early on, we asked a lot of like very hard, I think on the surface level, philosophical questions, but to the extent like very high signal questions when it comes down to where we at in terms of values and purpose, motivation as to why we want to pursue a startup. I think typically one of the mistakes I often see in founder dating is when they discuss logistics prematurely right? What I mean by that is like within the first couple of conversations, you're already talking about how valid this idea is, how much money you want to raise, what's the split between the different co-founders, and what's the vesting schedule. I think those are actually in many ways some of the easiest conversation to have. But I think it's also some of the most like concrete question to have, which is why people get into those conversations very early. But I think ultimately that's a mistake, because as a founding team, if you're not aligned on your goal, what you want out of the partnership, those questions tend to be very difficult to answer. So I think one of the things that we did I really like is just be very intentional about the fact that this is a partnership first, and then the business stuff kind of comes later. And I do think that really accelerates and kind of like bypass some of the much harder questions that we need to have. And, as to Jem said, ultimately this is going to be a 8 to 10 years in endeavor. So it's much more valuable for us to make sure that we are fully compatible. We are aligned on many of the higher level goals, motivations, activities before we get to the technical details. Ideas change. Ideas itself has no intrinsic value. So it's mostly focused on the partnership of this rather than the idea, business, and logistics side of this.
Are you indeed like be kind, like you talked about? Hong is extremely kind, but still deal with the business.
Yeah, it's probably helpful for me to define what I mean by kind. I have this thesis in life that's probably adverse to the way a lot of people think about it, is that niceness and kindness are not the same thing.
Yes.
Yep. Being honest is kind, right? And sure, there's a whole gradient of like how you present that information, how you, present your honesty. Some people believe in the concept of radical candor, where like anything that hits your head, you're honor bound to tell somebody, which I don't agree with. But when you are asked for your opinion, or when you have an opportunity to give your opinion, I do believe you're honor bound to be honest about it. And I view that to be kind, even if it doesn't always come off as nice.
Yeah, I think part of that is just like, I think earlier I mentioned that like trust and your relationship with each other is advantage. I think that trust buys us a lot of leverage when it comes down to just what we perceive to be unkind, right? So to kind of give you a more concrete example, when James says something that like I might not necessarily like to hear, I know that James does not have any kind of ill intent, and he's just being honest and direct.
Yeah, I probably don't like saying it either.
Yeah. And I think it's really constructive to create that compartmentalization, which is your relationship with each other is different to the subject or the topic that's currently at discussion, right? I think that trust effectively allows you to kind of have really difficult conversations, but then limit the impact of the difficult conversations to the conversation itself, rather than your relationship with each other. And, that relationship effectively buys you a huge amount of leverage and autonomy when it comes down to your ability to have difficult conversations. You may disagree very passionately on particular things, but you know that at the end of the day, both of you are trying to pull towards the same goal. And more frequently than not, it's more important to make a decision than it is to make the right decision. So having that trust to go like, great, we don't disagree. Let's go with yours. Let's minimize the consequences of it, or the worst case consequences of it, and then let's just go press forward with it. It's typically, the more speedy, the more fast way to do things. So I think the relationship itself just buys you a huge amount of leverage when it comes down to making hard decisions, and then especially when it comes down to making hard decisions very quickly.
I'll just take a random example. If Hong and James, you guys are deciding something, and James thinks that you guys should do what he's saying, and you guys go with that. That goes wrong. How do you refrain from blaming James for that?
It's a good question.
Yeah. So, I think one of the reasons you would actually want to be part of this startup ecosystem, whether if you're a founder, co-founder, or a founding engineer, a large pattern typically is that you want autonomy, right? There's a million things to do. You want to do all of them. You want to have the responsibility. You want to have the ownership to go and pursue those things in a very automated manner. Autonomy is not real autonomy, and responsibility is not real responsibility without the consequences that come with those responsibility. And part of the compartmentalization is that all of us wants autonomy, all of us wants responsibility, and all of us wants, in many ways, to deal with the consequences of our decision. You can't really give someone the real ownership without giving them the responsibility part of that. My kind of framework for it just compartmentalize the thing, which is typically the decision and the subject, with the person that's making those decisions. If you're asking someone to make a million decisions, some of those decisions have to go wrong. No one's perfect. Great engineers push terrible code sometimes, and terrible engineers push amazing code sometimes. The difference is consistency. That really differs between the two. So just because someone might have made an incorrect decision and that's had to deal with that consequences, doesn't really mean that we have to blame them for it, right? I think it's more about reflecting on the decision itself rather than the person, because ultimately we can't help but to learn consistently over many of the decisions that we make, and then over a longer period of time we get more consistent. So I think the blame culture itself just is effectively what you make of it. Another thing for us is, we can't ask people to go and, do really brave things without allowing them the space to make mistakes and give them the full responsibility.
The distinction between responsibility and blame is very important. I actually have a thesis that I think most people want autonomy and they want responsibility, but they don't want ownership of ramification, which is not how that works. And that's because most of assigning ramifications to somebody is viewed through the lens of blame, right? It's like it's a shameful thing. And that's just fundamentally unhelpful. Granted, there are some things that people do in this world that deserve blame, right? Let's be very clear. But hopefully, most things that happen in a business context are more about understanding whose responsibility it was, understanding who made the decision, understanding why that might not have been a good decision, and then leaving it behind you and moving on. Right? Dwelling on failure, especially if you have other people who are essentially compounding that sense of guilt, is just a very, very unhelpful way to really live your life in any way, shape, or form. Right? Again, understanding where something went wrong and being honest with yourself that was something you did and it was a part of you. You can't ignore it or else you're never going to grow as a person. But staying mired in the muck of that shame is very unhelpful, and most people are hard enough on themselves without their business partner or their colleagues, adding to that sense of shame.
Which one of you took the decision to build a venture-backed company?
I don't think either of us made that decision. I think it was kind of a foregone conclusion in both of our minds. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to make an impact. I think for us, we kind of want to deliver value at a much larger magnitude, which then kind of naturally leaned us towards more of a venture-backed company rather than a bootstrap company. I think that being said, we don't necessarily have any prejudice against bootstrap company per se.
Definitely not.
In many ways, I think bootstrap company is significantly harder, right? Because you have to make revenue very quickly. You're most likely burning your own personal wealth to make sure that company succeed.
Or you're doing it very moderately and you're just moving slower. They've both got their pluses. They both got their minuses. I think they're both incredibly valid ways to pursue building a business. one of our shared goals was that we wanted to build a venture-backed business. We've both been a part of the venture-backed ecosystem for quite some time. And we've seen its successes, we've seen its pitfalls, and we wanted our turn at the table to give it a shot. And I like what you said about impact, right? Like there's no denying that bootstrap companies can have incredible impact. We just wanted to, I think on the whole, venture-backed companies are able to create impact a little bit quicker because they don't have resource constraint for the most part. Everybody has resource constraints, right? But they have less of a resource constraint. Like you can get more money in the door than you necessarily deserve early on. So that was always, it was kind of always the path that we wanted to follow.
I had a lot of people that I've had on the past on the show. Most of them have told me that they didn't care about whether they build a venture-backed company or a bootstrap company. All they wanted to do was solve the problem.
I only think that depending on the problem that you're solving, it does push you towards one or the other direction. Primarily because not all companies, or at least not all ideas, can be bootstrapped, or at least not easily bootstrapped. So, for example, if you did want to work on kind of consumer packaged goods, you need to do the research to actually have a product that people want, and then also back up the manufacturing process for those products. Similarly, for us, because we try to work in AI, and that AI is obviously a very fast, accelerating industry, is clearly very competitive. The talent cost in this industry is very high. That effectively means that as we go through, I think venture-backed route for this particular business idea is at least had some advantage compared to a bootstrap route. Because I think within this industry that we're currently working in, speed and time to market is very valuable, where I think we could potentially go for a bootstrap route, but as we know, the resources are very limited. So I certainly believe that, like, depending on what ideas you're working on, you're probably slightly better suited compared to one of these roles. At the same time, there are many other options out there. It's not a binary word. You either bootstrap or you raise. You could raise much smaller angel round and never take on any institutional investors. You could potentially take on some debt that would help you without going through the dilution. There's a full spectrum as to exactly what you want to do based on your personal values, what kind of company you want to run. I think for us, time to market, being able to develop very quickly, being able to show value very quickly is very high up in the hierarchy. Hence why I think venture definitely makes a lot more sense for us.
Also for us, like, I'll say two things. The first is that I've run a bootstrap company before, and I've got some scars around that. Again, there are a million ways to do it, but like we ran a company for years, like never paying ourselves and hustling on the side to make ends meet. And that's really exhausting, and it takes your focus away from the core matter at hand, from the core company you're trying to build. Now, again, like if we were independently wealthy and we could just bootstrap a company and pay engineers and all this stuff, like I probably have a different thesis on it. But we're not, and we weren't, and we needed capital to come from somewhere if we wanted to move quickly. And as a result of that, venture was just like a very logical path. And also, just if we're being brutally honest, like we've all worked around venture-backed companies and the ecosystem for long enough such that we had a pretty good network. So it was never, I think we're both fortunate to say that when it came to the idea of raising money, I'm not saying we're experts in any way, shape, or form, but like we knew where to start. We knew we had a good network that we could pull on to help us make that a thing, as opposed to a lot of people who I know don't come from the venture-backed world. And the idea of raising money from institutional investors or even angels is like totally foreign. So I do think it was also like a little bit of playing into our strengths to a degree.
But it had been nice plan out the fundraising process. Like you had angels on, you had an institutional on. How did that?
There's many big, large factor at play here, right? So I think for example, how much traction you have makes a big difference. The microenvironments as to how much cash or liquidity is available upstream from LPs to GPs is, does have a huge impact. When you're raising from much more volatile markets, such as the Bay Area, the whole idea of that season typically has a large impact as well. Not to mention, there's things like SVB that might occur that drastically impacts it. For us, our planning effectively just involves a huge amount of research. What I mean by that is to kind of figure out, based on the network we have, based on the co-founders and people within our network that has gone through similar journeys, understand exactly how they run that process. Obviously, people run it differently. I think for us, it's doing a lot of critical thinking as to what worked for other people, what didn't work for other people, on what might work for us and what doesn't work for us. The second part is also just amount of research you typically put in terms of which shop you're talking to, what's their check size, and just what's their investment thesis, what's their process like. That typically has a huge implication for your fundraising process itself. For us, I think our last run, at least for me anyway, is my first time raising institutional capital. So it's a huge amount of learning curve. There's a huge amount of things that we've done that we probably shouldn't have done it, that we would definitely do it very differently the next time around. But I think ultimately the planning for the fundraising process itself is largely dependent on just research from other co-founders. I don't know if you have anything, you probably have a lot to add there, Fabs.
Yeah. I'll start by saying that our fundraise ended up looking very differently than we thought it was going to. So we were pretty ready to close out a very small, angel friends and family round on pretty much the day that Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. So our original thesis was raise a little bit of money at a lower valuation, at a lower safe cap, go, build an earlier product, get a little bit of traction, and then we'll go back to market and we'll raise more money because we're doing something that's working, right? And then essentially when we went to go close that money, which was a couple $100,000, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, and everybody was like, look, we still believe in you too. We still believe in your ability to carry forward with this idea, but nobody knows what the market's going to do over the next 12 months, let alone 6 weeks, right? We don't know. Sure, let's say you raise 300K, you go get 10 customers, things are crushing, but the market's terrible and nobody wants to write a check, right? What's the point of putting this couple $100,000 into your company if you can't go raise money in 6 months? So pretty much what happened is everybody was like, look, we still believe in you, we're still in, but we need you to go get an institutional lead to raise at least $1 million for this idea. So that put us in the camp of then raising institutional capital, which we had not really done prior to that. We were talking to, I think our largest check was $50K from an angel. So that really changed everything fundamentally for us. And then I hope to concretely answer your question, to go all the way back to it. We did our best. And again, I'm not saying we did a great job. We'll definitely do it better next time, but we did our best to batch out those so that we tried to hit as many investors as possible within a short amount of time so that we could learn quicker, we could get yeses or nos quicker, and then hopefully we could stack up term sheets, right? So we actually had a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of bargaining power when those opportunities actually came to fruition. And for some of the cohorts, when we timed them out, it worked great. For others of the cohorts, it didn't work out great. But all in all, it was a good outcome.
What did you differentiate the process of raising money from angels versus from this?
Yeah, I think for angels, it's a lot more low key, right? For the most part, you're speaking with people who you've worked with, or they've invested in previous companies of yours. They're individuals. You circulate a deck. For some of them, maybe half of them, you have a call, and those are typically for $10,000 to $50,000 checks. For most people who are writing sub $10,000 checks, they already know you and they're not investing in you because of the idea or the market opportunity. They're investing in you because they think you're the kind of person who can go create something out of nothing. And then when you start to get up market, you end up speaking with people who do this a lot more frequently. right? Like as an example, most of the sub like $10,000 checks were either not a call or they were a brief 30-minute call, and they were like, great, send me wire instructions, no further questions. Once you start to go up market, you're speaking with people who have a lot more deal flow. Typically, you're speaking with people who are writing larger checks, and as a result of that, whether for better or for worse, like they just do this process more frequently. So whether they actually need to do it or they just feel they need to do it, they have a lot more questions for you, and they want to kind of run you through a process, kind of like a little mini VC shop in a lot of ways. So even when you start to get to the upper echelons of like check size and angel investing, specifically when you start to get to like family office style, it changes and it feels a lot more like institutional capital raising, with the exception of like there's not as much diligence that goes in, right? Like once somebody gets to conviction, you know, a VC will ask you for a bunch of documents, financials, things of that nature. Is like angels are pretty much like, okay, cool, we had 2 calls, we had 3 calls. I want you to talk to a founder that I know, and beyond that, I'm good. And then when you get to institutional capital raising, it's a lot more about, in early stage, everybody says it's about the founders. And I do believe it. It's like 80% about the founders, but that 20% remainder is about like your critical thinking, and they look at critical thinking through the lens of your market thesis, right? Like they're all very cognizant of the fact that your market thesis and your product idea are very, very likely to change. In fact, they almost undoubtedly will. But I think that's the equation they use to try to better understand the way that you think and how critically you're able to make decisions, and also like how you work with one another. And then once you pass that, then yeah, sure, the market matters, the product idea matters. But again, it's pretty much always like, who are the people in early stage investing? And with institutions, it's more, who are the partners? Whereas with angels, it's more like, oh, this is my friend or my ex-colleague. They're investing in me. They don't really know you, and they don't really care.
How did the people that invested in you really identify your?
Can you ask the last part of that question? The people that invested in us.
How did they identify your critical?
How did they dig into our critical thinking? Man, this is totally all in question.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at institutional investors, they typically have an investment thesis. That thesis could range from anything like market segmentation to specific type of founders that they're looking for. So the process when it comes down to just testing your intellectual rigor does differ from shop to shop. Some of the process that we're seeing is market sizing. They want to attempt to understand your process when it comes down to estimating the size of the market. How much thought have you put into the average customer value? What's the contract size? How did you estimate the number of customers you might have across an industry? Some of the other version that we're seeing is product roadmap. They typically want to see how you want to spend that money, what kind of feature you want to deliver, and when. A different version of that is they typically want to see your financial models. So how much engineers you plan to hire, how much thought process have you put into when it comes down to the cost of your infrastructure? Are you thinking about in-person versus remote? How are you thinking about legal spending and some of the other spendings that might occur during the lifetime of your business?
I think we got a check strictly I think we got one check strictly because we put legal spend in our financial model. And they were like, I've never seen an early stage founder think about legal spending before. Y'all are mature.
Yeah. I think one of the advice that we received quite earlier during our process from one of our advisor is rigor of thought. Like how much can you show other people how much thought have you put into specific areas of your business? I think it's very easy for us to say like, oh, hey, we have we'll hire 2 engineers. That's how we would spend this money, whereas more fidelity into that thought process would be like, hey, we're looking for engineers based in the Bay Area. They need to have X amount of experience in front end. We think these technology stack might be the best to go, so we'll want these. We'll need to pay them X amount of money plus X amount of equity. In addition, they probably need healthcare, and that will be X% based on which state that they're from, as well as IP assignment and different kind of contracting that might come into place.
Yeah, I mean, like said simply, I think our goal was always to just really do a lot of work around these things, right? Like don't just take something that you think is, like good enough to put on a slide and like hope that you can pitch your way around it. It's like actually put yourself in the shoes of yourself like 9 months from now and be like, what kind of financial model would I want to have in place to be operating my business off of? And there's two opportunities in most people's pitch decks that I think of a lot when it comes to like understanding somebody's rigor of thought or understanding somebody's mental process for something. One is exactly what Hong just said, but it's slightly different, which is, people are always like use of proceeds, right? Like we're raising X amount of money to accomplish Y. And way too often you see something along the lines of like, we're raising X amount of money to pay salaries, right? It's like, yes, that's true, but it doesn't tell your investors anything about what you're hoping to accomplish, right? So the more important thing is we're raising X amount of money in order to accomplish these 3 product milestones, and these 3 customer milestones, and maybe these 3 revenue milestones. And in order to do all those things, we believe we're going to need this type of headcount, right? Like that's a far more nuanced understanding or like example of how you're actually hoping to accomplish something. And you're probably going to be wrong, right? Like probably wrong about all the stuff, but that doesn't matter, right? Like the point is, do you have enough rigor of thought and like a system such that when you're wrong, when you're wrong early, hopefully as early as humanly possible, so that you can shift it and change it as you go. And then the other example is what Hong said earlier about like total addressable market, TAM. The trope is just, hey, it's, customer support is a $17 trillion market and we're going to get 1% of it. It's like, sure, you might. That's all well and good. You've properly demonstrated that it's a huge market. It's not $17 trillion for the record. The thesis isn't wrong, but it's more important to say, hey, we think we'll get 1%, but it's because we'll get this many contracts in these different categories for teams that look like this. And we're going to go get in front of those teams by marketing like this, right? Like that is just a far more rigorous kind of like bottoms up approach as opposed to top down approach. That again, although you're almost undoubtedly going to change it a million times and not be right, at least you're demonstrating both to other people, but more importantly to yourselves, that like you're learning how to think through these things so that when you inevitably have to change your mind a million times and pivot around, you have a system by which you can like amend and come up with something better and not hopefully retread all the same mistakes you've made previously.
I go back to the point James made about preparing the spend, like knowing where to spend the money that you raise. How did you guys figure that out early on? And considering that you could be wrong, how did you figure out where the money would go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of categories that are pretty non-negotiable, right? I mean, like you need resources to build product, you need resources to sell product, and typically in an early stage company, right? Like those are just humans, right? Like from the very early days, I don't remember exactly what the figure is, but we were like 92% of this business's expenses are going to be people. And our thesis overarchingly, and then I'll say something a little bit more detailed, which is you want to make a decision to allocate resources, whether they're time, whether they're money, whether they're brand cachet, whatever it is, in a way such that if you need to reverse it, you know how to reverse it. And I don't mean you can get the money back, but I mean like you can stop the spend or you can change the spend to something else. And you can do that with like very little downstream ramification. So that's kind of our biggest thesis on early stage spending, or really early stage companies in general, is like, you're probably going to be wrong. You need to move fast. It's better to make a decision than to wait for the perfect decision, and just do your best to make sure that like, if you did make a decision, you can reverse engineer it, or you can stop it and you can do something else with like pretty low ramification. And then to speak a little bit more concretely, we made a decision pretty early on to work with more senior folks We just like we're not really hierarchical as people. We're not really hierarchical as founders and leaders. Like we don't really want to be out here giving commands to people. That's not really the way that we like to work. We're big believers, similar to what Hong said earlier, that like, yeah, we're good at some things, but we're going to have a bunch of responsibilities that we're not necessarily good at. And we also want to learn and get better along the way, right? So like for us, it made sense and also felt good to hire other people, bring them onto the team that we felt were peers who were better than us at a lot of stuff and who we could then delegate things to and be like, look, you're the expert. Like, I'm not going to sit here and micromanage you on product design because you're great. You know what you're doing. And I can learn a lot by working with you. But it's not just people who have expertise in certain doctrines like engineering or product design backend, right? Like are you bringing on somebody who just generally is like a good person with a good head on their shoulders because they're going to just categorically make our lives better, make our company building more enjoyable. And just that's just kind of the way we wanted to do things, was like build a good team of folks who we legitimately enjoy spending time with and who we feel like we can learn something from every day.
We do a lot of like backward planning. So one of the ways we would do this is like, hey, if we want to raise the next round, here's the kind of number we need to put up on the board in order to raise that from a position of strength. That then puts us to say like, hey, we need to get to 1 million ARR or maybe 100K ARR. What do we need to do in order to get to that ARR? That then requires perhaps X number of customers. In order to support that X number of customers, we might need X number of engineers to continue the process to us to get there. We might also need X% spending in terms of website, publicity, marketing to get us there. And I think when it comes down to spending and to know if we're spending the right thing, it's always good to have some kind of magnetic north always at the back of your head to know that you're spending towards some kind of incremental goal. Once you achieve that goal, that allows you to either hit positive revenue, or in the case that's most likely put you into a really great position to go to your next funding round. Whether if it's revenue, whether if it's number of engaged users, it's really good for you to kind of have magnetic north such that when you're spending money, you can ask yourself, like, is this helping with getting us to the next stage?
Do you guys think startup should keep results?
100%.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you're like, yeah, you're very rarely going to hit the goals you set in the way that you thought you were going to hit them, right? Like you might hit them, but it's probably going to look different than you thought it was going to look. So yes, 100%.
Yeah. Everything's be more expensive than you think it is. Pretty much most things are going to take longer than you think it's going to take. It's when you're doing financial planning, you typically just unaware of all the different ways the money could be spent. Pretty much most of the ways that you think money could be spent is there, and then you're missing out a huge amount of ways that money will leave your bank account that you just didn't foresee. So not only should you always, have at least about 6 months or so before your next fundraise, you should probably even build more of that, especially if you don't come from an entrepreneur/finance background, because there's going to be unforeseen ways for you to spend that cash that you just haven't really thought of.
Yeah, and we like to talk about setting goals in such a way that like we'll be raising with some substantial percentage of the last fundraise still in our bank account, right? Like it might be 6 months, it might be 9 months of runway, whatever that is, but you just if you can avoid it, right? Like, and obviously this is a very nuanced topic. If you can avoid it, you don't want to be raising money with your back against the wall, right? Like you don't want to be going out to market and people are like, these folks need money or else they're going to shutter, so I have leverage. And obviously that's not always possible. And there's also some wisdom to like, hey, maybe you raise with 3 months of runway left because the delta between 3 months and 6 months let you 2x your customer count or let you 2x your revenue, right? So you're in a far stronger position. But that's a different story to be telling. Like, you did that deliberately rather than, oh shoot, we've got 3 months left. Like, we got to scrap together a fundraise. Like, that's just, you never want to be in that situation.
I have met people on the path that sort of a question that's on the same premise. I usually get two responses, that there are like two kinds of people: one that perform better or are able to fundraise better when their backs are up against the wall, versus those that know that they have runway and they can survive the next 2 months and continue reading to this. Which one of those buckets do you see yourself?
Well, until this company, I'd never not raised money with my back against the wall, so I can definitely do it. I think from a stress level, I would prefer to do it knowing that we have plenty of runway. And it's not about the runway per se. Like, it's about the fact that we set out a strategy and it worked.
Yeah.
And, like, it's very self-fulfilling because I think we're on the right path. But I mean, like, you know, we operate with our backs against the wall, like and I think that's one thing too, is like, there's a thing in startup where, like, you raise a big round and you're like, oh, phew. But, like, any entrepreneur who's been through it knows that, like, raising money is ironically easier than building a company. So it's like, you can't let the pressure off just because you've got money in the bank. I think in a lot of ways it actually ups the pressure, because now you've got other people who are counting on you and other people who have shown that they believe in you. And hopefully you take that to mean, like, hey, other people believe this is possible too, and that, like, we're the dudes to do it. So if anything, I think that actually, like, ups the ante.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between being able to do hard things and making
Forcing yourself to do it.
right, and making things really hard for yourself. I think for us, like, we can, you know, sure, we might be able to perform 2-3% better if our back were against the wall and we have to raise. But I honestly think that 2 and 3% improvement in performance is unnecessary, right? If you have a good strategy, you have a very well executed plan, like, there's no need to make things really hard for yourself. There's plenty of hard things for you to focus on anyway. And I think, like, if you could avoid, I think, especially as a founder, as you go through all of these things that's, you know, all challenging in all different ways, minimizing the amount of hardship you have to go through, especially when those things can be 100% avoided, is drastically undervalued. You're going to have an interpersonal kind of like team organization problem you're going to have to work through that requires a huge amount of your emotional bandwidth. You're going to have to, unhappy customers that you need to kind of build and cater for. You're going to have situations where you don't want to spend that cash. You're going to have vendors asking you for cash that you don't want to spend. If you could avoid it, raising, you know, a stressful situation on top of that, that just doesn't give the right trade-off. And it's better that you save that emotional availability to focus on all of these other things. People do perform well under pressure. I just don't think that you need to kind of cut your arms off such that you punch harder with your other hand.
As they say.
Let's address the elephant in the room first. What are you guys doing?
Our company's called Ducky, and we are building a new way for customer support professionals to do their work on a day-to-day basis. So what that looks like right now is an agent assistant that helps customer support professionals find the information they need in the snap of a finger, or 2 fingers, I guess, because that's how you snap. As well as guiding them in the way that they can respond to customers. Fast forward to the grander vision is we fundamentally don't believe that customer support professionals should be answering the same questions and doing the same tasks over and over and over. We think that there's a really amazing place for machine learning and artificial intelligence to step in and take a lot of the repetitious work off their plates so that they can focus on being more empathetic and problem solving alongside customers.
What you guys are building Ducky is to help customer support representatives, but where do you put up the barrier between helping them versus replacing?
Yeah. So I think although the technology itself has been available for a while, there's probably kind of a couple of things that didn't fully align, and still hasn't fully aligned. So particularly, I think the delivery mechanism for this technology hasn't been very well explored and hasn't been very well thought out. Intuitively, our organic thinking is like, hey, let's just replace the customer support agent completely. However, as you get deeper into that problem, what you would realize is that the customer support agent does a lot more than just communicate. They typically makes a lot of decision as they are looking to resolve the ticket that isn't being recorded, or at least you only see the downstream impact of that decision making. They also typically takes a lot more actions beyond just responding to a ticket. For example, they might go into a payment system, change different pricing plans. They might go into a inventory system, check stock level. They might go into a shipping system that generates return shipping label. There is a huge amount of technology barrier and also just product thinking that needs to think through as to the scope and the responsibility of a customer service agent. They do a lot more than what we think they do. But ultimately, at the end of that, our ways of approaching this is really kind of figure out a way to kind of help them do their job a lot better. And throughout that process, be able to kind of capture some of the either the decision process that currently takes place in their head, or perhaps some of the action process that we take outside of a variety of different platforms. We don't think that a customer service agent is ever going to be replaced, to be honest. We think that their job would probably get a lot more efficient and effective in comparison. But ultimately, as we even think about this from a consumer perspective, if everyone has the automated technology, what would most likely differentiate your company from another company is your customer service and how much human you put into that process. So our kind of projection or forecast to this is most likely that they aren't going to be completely replaced, but rather they will be asked to do different things. For example, if all the menu stuff is being automated, that would open up space for them to do proactive stuff, right? Hey, why do you need to create a ticket to know that your shipping address is wrong? Why couldn't they reach out proactively? Most likely, some of the responsibility would change, and then push them to do higher value add activities. That being said, I don't think that job would disappear completely. I do think the role would kind of change a little bit. We're talking about I think 8 to 10 years time, because to figure out exactly how to deliver the technology is going to be a lot more nuanced, and I think most likely not in the ways that we anticipate it to be.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think the scaling ratio of company growth to customer support headcount is already breaking, and it will probably break even further. And by that, I mean, there's no reason in the future, in our opinion at least, that if you want to, let's just say, double the number of customers your business has, that you also need to double the number of customer support folks you have. We think teams will get a lot more efficient. But again, not going in and firing broad swaths of people, right? If you have a team of 10 and your company is going to scale from, let's say, 10 million in ARR to 20 million in ARR, most likely that team of 10, or maybe hiring 1 or 2 other people with additional efficiencies via software, will allow you to do an even better job than 20 people would. And then it's not just about the technology, it's also about market appetite. And by that, I mean more overarchingly the ethos of the times, right? Human beings like talking to other human beings still in most instances. I understand that's not always the case, and some people don't want to talk to a person or pick up the phone. I totally get it. But for the most part, if you're dealing with something, specifically something like your money, right? people want to have a higher degree of touch with customer service to know that they're talking to a real person, know they're talking with a reputable company, and have that like psychological safety of, hey, where's my money? Is it in good hands? And similarly, you have to think about who the buyers of this software are. The buyers are customer support professionals, right? They are people who are inherently more empathetic and care more about their teams than a lot of people in business. And most of them are not excited about the idea of like, hey, I got something where you could fire your whole team. Like, that's just not the thing. That's not the thing that the buyers want to hear either. It's not what their teams are excited about. So what we like to say is like, everybody always says like, oh, AI is coming for your job. It's like, yeah, sure, maybe eventually, but I think it's far more realistic that AI is coming for your tasks, not your job.
Basically, the so-called AGI that will eventually take over the jobs taking you.
We'll let the ML mind and the
customer philosophy question is I think first of all, like I mean AGI is super ill-defined right now at this moment in time. But probably more importantly is a bit of a moot point. The current system that we have today, even when we're looking at these large language models, are ultimately just looking at coherency between data and doesn't look at causality. There's no system built that actually understands causality on a deep and fundamental level, which then probably put us at least like 20 to 50 years away from whatever the G in AGI is. But ultimately, I think it's kind of a moot point, in the sense that it's really interesting and then intellectually satisfying for us to kind of project into a future where such technology does exist. Whether if it's slow takeoff, fast takeoff, whether if we do get to an intellectual explosion, it is very interesting for us to think about. But ultimately, when we're looking at today, the technology is already there for application. We don't need newer, better technology to make a meaningful impact in our everyday life. The technology we have today is already pretty good, but yet we haven't really figured out a great way to bring that technology to market. Ultimately, is when you bring that technology to market that actually makes a drastic impact, and not necessarily, the pure intellectual pursuit of it. Would it make a big difference? Hell yeah. When is it going to make a difference? Who knows?
You got to figure out the G in the AGI. But I think there's incredible. I learned a lot from this one, and I hope you guys learned.
Yeah,
One question which I'd like to end with. I've been into startups, recent all these things. 11. What do you think is one fact that will blow 11-year-old me's mind?
One fact that would blow the 11-year-old's mind. I'm not quite sure when that would be.
That's an excellent question.
Yeah. I think there's something about, I don't know if I have a good answer for this one. I think when we're looking at venture capital, what is consistently surprising is how delusional everyone can be within that ecosystem sometimes. And I say everyone as I think founders sometimes can be very delusional, as well as VCs can be very delusional, especially in the pre-seed and seed stage. And I think the ecosystem itself is designed such that you're really looking for the next big thing, which then means that I think fundamentally a lot of the quirky and in some ways wonderful, in other ways weird ideas gets an incredible of capital that backs it. I think like if we tell 11-year-olds like, hey, there's a business in cutting off your head and frozen your brain for future use is a legitimate business idea, I think that's probably something they would find quite shocking.
Yeah, or like the amount of money going to asteroid mining.
Yeah.
No, it's seriously though. I mean, I think I was lecturing to a bunch of high schoolers who are aspiring entrepreneurs the other day, a couple months ago, and one thing that came up that really blew their minds was kind of like the power law dynamics of venture, specifically the concept of like, hey, if we built our business up to, let's just say $10 million in annual revenue and went and sold it for like 50 million bucks, like that's still considered to be a bit of a failure in venture. And I don't mean that with a capital F, right? Like hopefully nobody here would agree that that's failing, but like everybody else from the outside looks in and goes, oh my God, what a success. And like people who operate in venture are like, yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Right? that continues to blow the fear out of my mind. I'm so glad you got the chance to do this, and I think that's it from my side.
Awesome. Avik, thank you so much. It was really, really fun. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and hope we get to chat soon.
Yep. Maybe that's good. Not literally.
Likewise, no, this has been very, very enjoyable. Glad we got to chat. Obviously, best of luck with the podcast. I'm sure you have lots of great conversations ahead of you as well.